Turn off this transcript. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our landscape and woodland design talk. We have Robin Gray with us today, and I just wanted to set the scene. I've started the recording, so we're just going to go straight into it. So, just setting the scene. I thought about doing this while I was driving in Shropshire along the Wenlock Edge, and I could see somebody had done some felling on the edge. And what they'd done is they'd cut down an area that was perfectly square. And I was just driving along thinking, wow, that's a real shame that they haven't really thought about their impact in the landscape. And I actually thought, actually, this is probably quite a good, relevant aspect of what we're doing as small woodland owners. And we might think, well, it's just a small woodland, but in actual fact, we might have quite a big impact on the landscape. So I thought it'd be really good to invite Robin along. I've known Robin for a few years. We also have a mutual interest. We both worked in South Yorkshire on the pit sites that were ameliorated and planted. So we've got an awful lot of shared pride in those sites. And I spoke to Robin about this subject, and he very kindly offered his time to just go through what he knows about landscape and woodlands and the impacts they can have. I think there are a few other things in there. He's told me, and I'll hand over in a second, but he's told me he's quite happy for questions. And if there are areas in the talk that we do want to kind of pause and kind of expand on, then he very much welcomes that. So if you can, locate your raise a hand button, and I will keep an eye out. And if anyone's got any questions while Robin's talking, you have two choices: raise a hand, and I'll bring you in, or you could just write something in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that and bring those questions in as and when. So, Robin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Thank you very much for the invitation as well. It's great to be talking to the Small Woods Association. As I said, I'm more than happy to take questions. Let's make this more of a dialogue. What Simon said is he definitely did not want death by PowerPoint. I hope it's not death by PowerPoint. So yeah, happy to take questions from you. And as Simon says, if we go back some time, we've got some shared history, I think, in South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire on those old coalfield sites, which I don't know about you, Simon, but I've been watching the latest series of Sherwood, and it's bringing back some memories, especially when Sharbrook, I think, is one of the sites that I had to manage as well. So it features in Sherwood. There we go. So okay. I'm going to share. As I say, more than happy. It'd be really nice actually on the chat thing just to say who you are. You might all know each other. I don't know. It's the first time I've been to one of these events. Say a bit about yourself. What part of the country you're from? I'm up here in West Yorkshire. I'm in Hebden Bridge, and Calder Valley, which we have a lot of undermanaged woodland. I'm staring out a window. I can see some from here actually. Okay. What I'll do. This is me, Robin Gray, CMLI. I'm a chartered landscape architect working for the Forestry Commission. I'm landscape and woodland design advisor with a policy advice team. I've been with the Commission 3 years, but I've been in the woodland forestry world for about 25 years. So these are the 4 sections that I'm going to talk about today. What I'll do is I'll do a little section and then I'll stop sharing and then we'll perhaps have a little bit of a discussion. So, I'll give you a little bit of background about landscape and the Forestry Commission, bit about woodland design, talk about some of the work I've done on the people side of the Forestry Commission. We actually have brought together some focus groups and kind of looked at the woodland agenda in the wider society and what support we might have for, say, for example, UK Forestry Standard. And then finally, a little bit on woodland management. Here's an alert. I'm sort of public health alert, health warning. I'm not a forester. I have done a lot in terms of woodland, but I'm not like a forester. But nevertheless, knowing I was coming to speak to you, I sort of picked the brains of some of my colleagues, and I'm giving a sort of heads up of where things might be going in your sector. So, yeah, I am a landscape and woodland design advisor. There are 2 of us in the Forestry Commission in England. There's myself and Richard Hellier. And we are, I'm based here, up here in the north, Richard's down in the south. We are very much standing on the shoulders of giants in that Dame Sylvia Crowe, who was a major force in forestry and landscape. She was the first woodland landscape architect employed by the Forestry Commission back in the 60s, and a former past president of the Landscape Institute. And coming into the Forestry Commission, the one thing I would say about the Forestry Commission is that, or I used to say about the Forestry Commission, is that it's the only sector where it has landscape principles underlying how we deliver on forestry or woodland creation or woodland management. I was then corrected by a landscape architect friend of mine who said, no, you'll find that there are those guidelines for roads and there are guidelines for the power industry. Not surprisingly, Dame Sylvia Crowe had a hand in those sort of milestone guidelines for roads and for power. So truly a giant in the world of landscape. And it won't have escaped your attention that she was a woman in very much a man's world in the 60s. So yeah, a lot to celebrate. So I suppose you're thinking, well, what does a landscape architect do in the Forestry Commission? Well, this kind of selection of slides, I actually do a lot of sort of in-house training, but I also go out to the wider sector in terms of community forests, National Trust, Woodland Trust, and I deliver landscape and woodland design training workshops where we actually try and put UK forestry standard into practice in the field, taking a site, looking at how we might design that with a number of different drivers. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to actually have the landowner, which is, the vital part of that, what's actually driving this scheme. So we do that training. That's one part of my job. The other part is casework. So new woodland creation schemes will cross my desk and I will give comments on them in terms of landscape. I also have other colleagues, ecologists and archaeologists, because it won't have escaped your attention that the Commission has actually grown in size over the last 3 years, and that has meant that we have a lot more in-house capacity. People, specialists like myself, archaeologists, and that means that we are in a stronger position than we've ever been to make our own decisions on woodland creation, for example. So we're no longer dependent on getting that information from local authorities, for example. So yeah, and the final bit of my work is policy. So I get involved with policy, and you'll see some of the guidance that I talk about today is on .gov.uk. But perhaps we should start out, and I realize I can't see the chat. so you might be putting stuff on chat, but I won't be able to see it. So I'll rely on Simon perhaps sort of shouting out. But if I was to say to you, what is landscape? What is the first thing that enters your mind in terms of landscape? Not being able to see the chat, I'm kind of guess that you'll look at that and you think, well, visual. It's pretty visual. We're in a stunning Lake District here, looking on Derwent Water over to Cat Bells. It's immediately front and center. But actually, our interpretation of what we mean by landscape has changed, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years. So we see landscape not just as visual, but actually a kind of hook, if you like, for many other elements or of what we call landscape, really. What are they? Well, landform, soils, ecology, climate. We can see all that in that picture. We can interpret the soils, we can look at the landform. Cultural values. We're in the Lake District. We're in the land of Wordsworth here. The sort of romantics, that has an impact in terms of how we perceive a landscape. Human influences, obviously, land use, land management, settlement. But that's not to ignore the aesthetic qualities, which aren't just visual, but they could be sensory as well. I think we've all possibly been in a Lake District and a howling wind and vertical or even horizontal rain. That's all part of the experience of the Lake District. So yeah, getting over that, what is landscape, which you can see is actually kind of all encompassing, which makes for a very interesting job, but sometimes a job which is difficult to put into a box. And we all, as professionals, like to put our work into a box or not, as the case may be. How does this influence sort of forestry? So the point I would say about, say, woodland creation, and I will be talking quite a lot about woodland creation, and it goes to the point that Simon made right at the outset, is our woods are within a wider landscape setting. And when it comes to woodland creation, we've been fitting our woodland into landscapes for a long time. So I love this image. It's from an estate in North Yorkshire. Whenever I'm said, oh, what about Photoshop? Perhaps perhaps using some of the more recent sort of software packages. Well, this is kind of your 18th century Photoshop, fitting woodland into a landscape. And indeed, this is, in a strange way, is fitting woodland into landscape. This is very much of its time. This was the 1960s. And I wish I could see your faces, because I'm sure you'll all have a different reaction to this. Some people might like it, other people not less so. But the point about this is it was designed. This was designed in the 1960s, and that design was the most efficient to deliver on the outcome that they required, which was as much productive forestry with as little fencing as possible. Perhaps they were following some sort of land ownership line in southern Scotland here. I think, that photo kind of shows why the commission needed a landscape architect like Dame Sylvia Crow, because when I look at it, I can think about these woodland principles and think, well, it doesn't really, actually, when we start to analyze a view like that, we think, right, okay, well, what is it about that forest and how it sits in that landscape? So I kind of suggest to you it really doesn't respect landform. That big, long, straight line doesn't reflect what was there before. In a strange way, if you were to say, oh, is this in scale or out of scale? A strange way, it is in scale. It's a big landscape and it's certainly a big forest in there. So that kind of teases out two of our woodland design principles: landform and scale. And if we just sort of bury down into that idea of scale and proportion, one of the principles is the scale of a woodland should relate to the scale reflected in the existing landscape. Landscape scale reduces lower down a hillside. So we've got these big open landscapes in the uplands, and then coming down into the lowlands, more intimate scale there. So what I suggest this might lend itself is that when we're looking at woodland and creating woodland, a woodland that might fit really well into a lowland landscape may look a bit out of scale in an upland landscape, all things being equal. Actually, it might be an opportunity, it might be a particular habitat or clough woodland, as we call it up here. Clough woodland is a sort of woodland within a valley. But that's a kind of general rule about scale and proportion. So here we have our friend Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall. And why has Robin put Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall into a slide presentation on woodland landscape and woodland design? I showed the previous slide to the Woodland Trust. I was doing this training with Woodland Trust, and I said, "Well, Robin, we don't do that sort of thing. That's like that's forestry with a capital F. That we don't do that sort of stuff. We just do broadleaf woodland. So kind of, do we need to pay attention to these principles?" And just my response to that actually came from another colleague in the Woodland Trust, and he said that, say in the urban fringe, they will get a lot of kind of 5-10 hectare sites. Some of these might be your sites, so I'm expecting a bit of kickback on this. That you get someone buys it and they want to do everything on that site. They want to do a bit of food growing. They want to sort of have a water body for wild swimming, or they want to have a bit of open space. They want to have a bit of woodland, and all are really commendable, but their overall impact on the landscape can lead to the fragmentation of that landscape. And I think that's the point that kind of Simon was saying, is to kind of think about our land ownership, our woodland, within the context of a wider landscape. So I hope I'm generating a debate here. That's the idea, but you may disagree. So yeah, you're entitled to disagree, by the way, of course. So that's a principle of scale. I'll talk about scale and landform. The other principle that we have in the forest design principles is one of unity, and I think you could replace that now with connectivity. And we all talk about this in the context of a Lawton review, connecting up our woodland. There is a biodiversity benefit from that. There's also a visual impact assessment in this view. The woodland, I would suggest, you could disagree, but I would suggest fits into that landscape better than the individual components. But there are multiple benefits from increasing the scale of woodland, not least on a practical basis when it comes to extraction and actually supporting woodland or forestry industry and jobs. Obviously that comes into play as well. And you find that actually, when I'm making a point to colleagues on landscape, it usually is the same point made by ecologists or foresters. We usually end up being on the same page. So I won't go into too much detail here, but just to let you, be really interesting to know if you're aware of UK forestry standard. It's It's a set of principles. It's should be by the bed of every woodland officer in the Forestry Commission for, you know, nighttime reading. We all talk about it endlessly. When we talk to agents, they say, yes, my scheme is UKFS compliant, and you know, then we kind of discuss whether it is or whether it isn't, because it's got so many, it really is the Bible really for the industry, and be interesting to know if you use it or have come across it or have heard of it. So I think what Simon said front and center was about context. You know, all our woodlands that we own or manage sit within landscapes, and all those landscapes are different, and they all have certain features to them that make them unique or similar, or we can compare them. So let's take a little closer look at that. And also the thing about UKFS, I've talked about some of the principles of forest design. I'll mention some others in a minute. But also when we are doing our management work, when we're doing, say we are clearing a plantation made up 100% of Sitka spruce, like the photograph I showed you, we would bring that back into UKFS through our conditions on restocking. So our conditions on restocking, UKFS now is no more than 65% a single species, 10% open space, 10% shrub. Have I got that right? I think I have. You'll tell me if I'm wrong. But those are actually, when we come to restocking, we can retrospectively try and get some of these schemes into UKFS compliance. Context. Yeah, this is a sort of, I don't know about you, but if I'm going on holiday to a new destination, I'm a bit old school. I would always get my Land Ranger OS map and have a little look, and that would tell me so much in that map about the place I was going to. If there was a landscape that I was not aware of, I would say that national character areas, which you can Google, you can find online, they are your Land Ranger map. They're very accessible. They tell you a lot about the landscape. They go into some of the cultural associations, which I'll mention as well as the ecology, and I'll have these strategic environmental objectives. So if you're intending to put woodland into your landscape, having a look at those will give you a clue. So I haven't read the one on the fens, but I don't think woodland creation would be in their strategic environmental objectives. So I might want to sort of interrogate that further and think, maybe there won't be the support from Natural England on this scheme. So beyond that are a number of landscape character assessments produced by local authorities, national parks. They are a little bit sometimes, well, some are very accessible, and I put a really good example there from the Yorkshire Dales. Some are a little bit technical, a little bit dry, but I use those because if a woodland is being designed, say in Shropshire, I'll look at their landscape character assessment. It will divide the county into lots of different landscape character types, and I'll look to see if this is something that the local authority might support or indeed object to. We do have objections, of course. So those are our 159 national character areas. So that's landscape context. I don't know where we're up to, maybe number 4 of our woodland design principles. Pattern of enclosure, field boundaries. Actually, they're a key part of the English landscape. We take them for granted in this country, but actually it's only when you really travel abroad that you come back to this country and you think, you know, the hedgerows of Devon or the Weald, you know, they are such a distinctive part of our landscape. And to lose that pattern of enclosure to woodland, or indeed loss of hedgerows through agricultural improvements since the last war, has led to a loss of quality in that landscape, but also in terms of biodiversity. So we're trying to put these elements back into the landscape to increase that connectivity. And we have 2 versions of pattern of enclosure. We have this sort of ancient pattern, kind of best represented in Devon and the south in terms of Weald, South Downs. You can see it looks old, doesn't it? It really, looks old. And then more planned countryside, I'd say this kind of is your Northamptonshire, East Midlands, East Anglia, which really goes back to the Enclosure Acts. And what I'd say is that if we were putting woodlands into these two landscapes, we'd be very careful about retaining that pattern of enclosure there in Devon, or should be. And it may be that our woodland might reflect what was already there in the planned countryside, shelter belts, for example. So we try and reflect the local landscape. Yeah, and you see, no presentation is complete without some reference to Oliver Rackham. So Oliver Rackham had his own kind of typology for landscapes in the British Isles, including Ireland, where he divided the ancient countryside into the sort of downs up to Essex, and the planned countryside up as far as the Yorkshire Wolds from Dorset. I'd say this was produced in the 1970s, and I'd say it's interesting almost historically itself, because we're perhaps not in that era since since this was drawn in the 60s. There have been massive changes already in the countryside. And do you know what? We should expect massive changes in the countryside in the next 40 or 50 years, which I'll come on to. So how might we use that information to populate a landscape with woodland? This is how pattern of enclosure, and it uses that idea of scale, the scale being slightly larger in the unenclosed uplands, so larger scale woodland, and smaller in the lowlands. Now, actually, do you know we've got massive targets for woodland creation, and I do accept that actually some of our landscapes are going to change, and they're going to change radically. So it may be that this pattern may not be fully sustainable, but it's about doing that in a being aware of that change that we are bringing and trying to work within the grain and being influenced by that grain. Yeah, okay. I've talked a lot about landscape in the wider setting. I've got a few slides now, and then yeah, it's about past 30. So what we'll then do is we'll come off screen and we'll just have a little chat or questions on that. I'm going to present a few slides which might be more pertinent to you with the small woodland context, and tell you something that you already know, that the edge of our woodlands, the open space, and is where the magic is for people, and that might be you as a woodland owner, and for biodiversity. And actually designing that edge into new woodland or designing it through management is probably one of the best things you can do for biodiversity. This is from my colleague Richard Hellier. He's gone into a kind of typology of different edges, and this is where certainly over the last 5 or 10 years been lots of interest about very different types of planting. Going back to the 1990s, there was either woodland creation or there was other habitat restoration. Now we're quite an exciting crossroads where we are talking about woodland creation, we're talking about wood pasture, we're talking about diffuse planting on the edges of woodlands, we're talking about agroforestry, we're talking about trees in places where we wouldn't expect them before. And so I think this is really exciting. I think it actually means a massive change to our landscape, which we are only at the beginning at, and people don't like change. So let's see. So this is Richard trying to put those into different approaches to edge. This is another one that actually is about community woodland. We get involved with the design of community woodland. That's where I started off in forestry. I was a community forester, and this was quite familiar to me, you know, actually engaging with residents, also thinking about those edges, and thinking about how we design woodland creation scheme to maximize the benefits. Of course, the most important thing about woodland creation is that we're not creating woodland. It's really a bit of a misnomer. We're planting trees in the hope of that becoming woodland. But nevertheless, in a lot of these schemes, and I'll hold my hands up to this, there was we were given a field, or we bought a field, or the Woodland Trust bought a field. We planted our trees, we put them in tubes, we fenced around them, we put an access path around the outside, and we pretty much ran away at that point, and hoped for the best sometimes, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I think in this approach, we're trying to get a bit more quality into the design. And when I say quality, I'm talking in terms of structure and diversity. Those two governing principles for woodlands, your woodlands, woodland management, exactly the same for creation, diversity and structure. And that might mean investing in, you know, feathered whips, for example, or creating exclosures to create a different sense or feel of a landscape. So I think these illustrations kind of give that approach there. Right, okay, I'm just going to stop sharing for a bit. My next section is about woodland management, which is really, you know, where I guess you guys are coming from. But, you know, if you want to stay off camera, you might be eating dinner, you know, putting the kids to bed or whatever. But if you want to sort of, I'll open it up if there's any questions or anything you just totally disagree with from what I've said so far. You can't agree with everything I've said, surely.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Small Woods Association, Simon. You promised me that they would be.
I promised you, yeah, a good,
Have I sent them to sleep?
a good debate. No, I think it's really thought provoking, and I think what I could see there was everything doesn't have to be accidental. You know, there can be planning involved. So what I'm really getting at is we saw the blocks of conifer up in Scotland, and we know that that was planned. You know, we know from what you said that that was the most efficient way of doing it. It was there for the war effort or following the war effort to bring back a timber economy. And then I think it's really good that you've kind of then moved on to that kind of what we can do for biodiversity for people and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of those big commercial blocks are going. You can already see it in the landscape.
Sure.
You can already see those hard lines disappearing with every operation we do. And it comes back really to my observation of Wenlock Edge and that big square that was punched out. And the fact that, you know, we've all got a part to play, I suppose, in ensuring that we don't kind of impact the landscape detrimentally. But we all want to continue doing what we need to do in terms of managing our woodland. And I think what you've highlighted in those initial slides is, you know, there's an awful lot we can do. We just have to have the ability to kind of step back and look upon it and
Sure. Yeah.
just check what we're doing. I'm
Yeah.
quite keen to hear from other people, and
Yes, sure. I've just noticed on the track. So what we have here, which is fascinating, we've got a real spread of up and down the country. So everyone from Scotland down to down to London. So yeah, that's really interesting actually. And you know, I'd be interested to hear if you've actually come across the UK Forestry Standard. I mean, as I say,
yeah,
we
we've
talk
actually
about it
got
all the time, don't we? But
we've
I'm
actually got
realizing.
Tom that's unmuted, so I'm hoping there might be a
Oh,
question there.
come on, Tom. Yeah,
Well, yeah, I
make us
see
earn our keep
no one
here.
was chatting. Yeah. No, thanks very much for the chat so far. For the talk so far. Yeah, I was interested in the agroforestry bit particularly. I'm a landscape architect for work.
Okay.
and I've not done forestry woodland plantations, but outside of work, I've done some community planting for people who own some land, for friends, and I think that does seem a trend, and it does seem a really positive trend.
Yeah.
And also, I'm sort of curious because I tend to, it's all native, and that's what we tend to work to. But I don't know what your thoughts are with non-native, particularly
Sure.
where the person owns the land, they want to frame a particular view,
Sure.
and they'd like to get a
Yeah.
specimen tree. In my mind, that's kind of acceptable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious what
Yeah.
the
So, well, yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So you've hit on two things, and just
yeah,
checking my slide pack, Tom, I took out some slides on agroforestry. So what I'll do, if you're willing to, um, I'll put them at the in at the end if I can
sure,
multitask. If I can multitask that far. Um, the thing about agroforestry, I think that's going to be a real
yeah,
game
I
changer.
think so.
Um, the rates are very attractive, up to £700, I think it is, for 200 trees per hectare. Very careful not to make it into woodland, but some of that might make it into woodland. But that's not the Forestry Commission speaking there. Actually, where we've got this alley cropping and fitting that into arable landscapes, we have so many multiple benefits from that in
Yes,
terms of
I've seen
soil
that. Yeah,
soil conservation, if it's in a pastoral um, sort of cycle in terms of shade. There's so many multiple benefits. So I think that's going to be the way things go. In terms of your question about species choice, yes. So, so there's so many ways that people have chosen species, and I can say from my own point, when I worked in the community forest, we really didn't give it too much thought, and that was wrong. Um, we always have you look at the mistakes that we made in the past. Um, I think traditionally using the National Vegetation Classification to identify your native species, again, well guided, and from an ecological point of view, you could say, yeah, that's why would you not see what is in your local landscape? That surely should be a
yes,
guiding factor. But even John Rodwell himself, who wrote the NVC classification, said these were only ever intended to be descriptive rather than prescriptive. I think the elephant in the room is the changing climate and pests and diseases. Pests and diseases, we can look about sudden acute oak decline. We can look at ash dieback. You can look at the squirrel damage to sycamore, or the sycamores have really struggled this year here because of some fungal um, disease. So, no species, not even Sitka spruce, is immune from any of these. So we have a palette of 37 native species, but really, if we are to really grasp resilience and adaptation, then we need to think a bit outside that box, and that's sometimes a difficult dialogue. Uh, you know, Particularly say with Natural England, they've got triple SIs which are exclusively ash in the Peak District, and now they
yeah.
spent years trying to get sycamore out of there, and now they're kind of, well, they have got a restocking which includes aspen, small leaf lime,
As I say,
a
yeah, small leaf
couple of other
lime's what I've
species.
turned to instead of
Yeah,
ash. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But we won't be prescriptive as a forestry commission. We will kind of take it in whatever way it goes, really,
I mean,
because
generally speaking,
yeah,
uh, uh,
mm,
I, I stick with native or
yeah,
a a variety of a native species, if you know what I mean. But I can think of a particular location where a friend asked me to do a
Sure.
kind of woodland, you know, a roughed up plan. And in that location, there was previously some plantation areas around it, which were not native.
Sure.
So then,
yeah. So Tom, I think Simon's coming on here to shift me forward. But
sorry, yes.
before
yes.
I go, species selection, two tools for you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
One is if you go on the woodland, depending on where you are on that native, non-native spectrum, Woodland Trust Species Selection Handbook is excellent. It's got all your native species in there, but they have put in a climate change factor in there. They've included climate change as a major dominant, as a factor in terms of identifying where your trees go. So you can look at that online. Excellent publication. And the other one, Forestry Commission or Forest Research, is the ecological site classification, where you can put in your site and it will produce a long list of species, including non-natives. And that came from Forest Research, Jens Hauff. What Jens said, which rather surprised me as the author of this amazing model, thinking, gosh, we can just plug it in and we get a long list. He said, this isn't a success story for silviculture. This is a failure for silviculture. The fact that we don't have enough knowledge to actually do this ourselves, I don't take as a sign of success, because what he would say is that you have no substitute for doing soil pits, identifying the nutrients and the soil moisture requirements on site. There's no substitute for looking around you and what's happening in other woodlands. Actually, those two tools will help you. So
it'd be useful if you could put that on the chat maybe
sure.
at the end.
Yeah, okay. I will do. I'll do a bit more on agroforestry as well. Shall I turn the light on as well? It's all suddenly gone dark up here.
I'll take this opportunity, Robin, to cut in. Sorry. I think I was coming on to kind of move us on a bit, but I think one of the things that I know about the ecological site survey, classification, is that it asks an awful lot of information, asks for an awful lot of information. And that information, if you don't get it right, you will end up with a list of the wrong species for your site. So that is a bit of a caveat to try not to use the defaults as everyone tends to, because it asks for all sorts of soil and climatic information. But it's available, that information is available. And if you plumb in the right information, you will get a really good readout with regards to species and how likely they are going to survive, if you would like to know, in 2050. Which is what is something that I think Jens has hit upon by building this tool, was we don't actually know which species we should be looking for in terms of that climate change aspect. So it is a really good tool, and I think it will serve us well, hopefully, in terms of 25 years time when we look back.
Yeah, because there is also the tree design action guide, but that's more individual species, where it sounds like yours is more of an ecological matrix.
Yes. I put those two on there, and they are I think the TDAG trees, I'm aware of that, but that's very much more urban environments than these sort of rural ones. So
so there's a lot to do with root protection and watering,
ultimate height, and
just the other reason why I kind of chipped in, Robin, was I think it's important to say that your species choice does have a landscape impact. Things like deciduous trees versus evergreen, things like that, do have quite an impact on the landscape in terms of your choice, species choice. So again, that's another factor to try and weave into your woodland design if you're at that stage, or if you're at a point where you've clear felled or you selectively felled and looking to restock. Those kind of impacts do kind of shine out if I'm not saying you're making a mistake, but if you do make a decision that possibly doesn't work in the landscape, it's worth noting that. So, Robin, do you want to
Sure.
continue? We can't see
Yeah,
any
let's do
more
that.
questions, so if we
Yeah.
continue, that might
Sure. Yeah.
spark some
Okay.
more discussion. Please don't be shy, everyone. Just
Don't worry. Those
just
are
pop your
great
hand up.
questions, by the way. So
Yeah.
yeah. So this little bit is stretching into some of the territory which is less familiar to me, but might be more familiar to you. I was having a conversation with Simon before we came on, and actually, you'll see. I mean, as you've seen from me, there's a real emphasis on woodland creation. That's the target which government has challenged Forestry England, 250,000 hectares. And, we've made some steady progress towards really, the last couple of years, we have upped the game in terms of woodland creation. So that is on the way. We're still below that target, of course we are, but it's actually allowed us to kind of focus the kind of shouting from the bylines. What about woodland management? Yeah, it's okay about creation, but what about woodland management? And I guess this really for you in the Small Woodlands Association is really where you are coming in. And you're probably thinking, well, Forestry Commission, it's all large scale. I was talking to Simon that actually the aspirations to bring woodland into sustainable management, and the key word is sustainable, i.e. with a active management plan, and sort of a 15-year felling, sort of felling regime or what have you, then if we're going to get much beyond 50%, we've already looked at the low-hanging fruit, Forestry England, of course. Also, big landowners like National Trust, MOD. We've already done. We've actually targeted those. So when we get into those 40% of woodland, which is the area of woodland, 40% is 10 hectares or below. That really brings us into small woodlands territory. And actually, so if we're going to get to those aspirational targets of pushing up our targets of woodlands into management, we've got to have an offer that appeals to small woodland owners. And I was just checking whether I could actually announce them here, but actually I think then it's for ministers to announce. But I think we're looking very much at that 3 hectare threshold there is for small woodlands, about what we could do to go below that threshold, to bring into the net so many other sort of woodland owners to incentivize woodland management in small woodlands. And bearing in mind, woods as small as half a hectare can have a really important impact on the landscape and for ecology. So we're really kind of looking at what we might do for these kind of woodlands. Yeah. Right, I'm just having to. Yes, there we go. Hopefully you can see that. So yeah, I'm really singing to the choir here about why woodland management. I mean, you're going to tell me why. You all have your own different reasons, but I suppose when I talk to my forestry colleagues, the two which come out there are about increasing species diversity. We've already mentioned that, and I might switch over to another slide pack which will show you about the worrying trends on pests and diseases. And we can't afford to have our apples in one basket or two baskets. We've got to have lots of different baskets, really. So species diversity and structural diversity, those are two ones that are kind of guiding principles. And it's about engineering light and space in your woodland, restocking invasive species, and preventing the spread of pests and diseases. Stuff which I kind of guessing you know already. But then we get into those things about maintaining, creating open space, and coppicing, of course, selective thinning. So these kind of ones which I'm kind of guessing that you know all about, and are speakers who probably have spoken to you much more eloquently about them than me. But when it comes to our woodland design, I've spoken a little bit about edge. The other area I'd talk about is about open space, and open space within woodland. So I would say as much when it comes to a new woodland creation scheme, as much as it's about deciding where your compartments are and fitting your trees into those compartments, it's much about designing the open space around those compartments and thinking, just as we did with hedgerows, about the connectivity of open space within a woodland, because that connectivity of open space within a woodland will favour other species as well, invertebrates. And I wasn't too aware until I did this job about how important aspect is in for here. So, east-west rides have a more chance of developing greater wildlife benefit because of prevailing sunshine, and actually that can have quite a massive impact within a woodland. And actually, if you have got these north-south rides, perhaps scalloping into that ride with a generous amount of open space can improve the potential for wildlife. So all these are in, I believe it is Operation Note 11. And if you Google Operation Note 11, I'll put the reference into the chat. That is a really accessible operations note. It's got lots, when I say accessible, it's got lots of diagrams like this. So, and just as importantly, I actually have this debate with my colleague Richard all the time. So how much of this is design and how much is management? Because actually, do you know what? When you create your woodland, you hope you create your woodland, you can actually increase this diversity, this structure, through management. You can do this, and this doesn't take this isn't kind of rocket science. It's just like giving some thought to your ride and the structure of it and how you achieve that by cuts over different regimes. Okay, I'll quickly, you can ask me what's going on here. I don't know. I got it off the internet, but I do like it. And as a slide for engaging people, I think it's quite good. I think that might be a football match over the other side of all those people on the there, but certainly looks slightly competitive in terms of tree climbing. I say I got this off the internet. It's not necessarily Forestry Commission policy, so don't try this one at home necessarily. I a couple of years ago got some funding from DEFRA to, basically look at UK forestry standard. I've talked to you about these principles, and I kind of thought, well, it'd be really interesting to get people's perceptions of, sort of woodland creation, and the changes that we're bringing about to the landscape, and see what support we do or don't have for woodland creation. And we chose some focus groups from around the country, Exmoor, the new national forest, where woodland used to be 9% and it's now 27% of the land cover of national forest. So in other words, it had undergone large change, and a new community forest, Northeast Community Forest. And we asked people about their views of woodland creation, positive and negative. And here you can see some of their responses. It was interesting how HS2 featured in that, even though it goes through none of those areas. So kind of interesting to interrogate where people were getting their information. And, you know, we can't underestimate the power of Countryfile, of course, but also social media, and you know, the algorithm, I suppose. So yeah, positives in there, in terms of woodland creation, particularly in a national forest. You know, people remember how the national forest used to be, and they preferred the landscape change now. So that was a great positive to all of those here who believe in woodland creation. You know, that actually it does have an impact that improves people's lives. And I think myself and Simon have seen that in South Yorkshire. You know, some parts of South Yorkshire are unrecognisable, you know, from horizon to horizon colliery spoil, you know. So yeah, we got those sort of comments. We asked people.
Robin.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go on. Yeah, go on. Yes. Yeah.
John's made quite. John Pitcairn has made a point that I've heard a few times, and I'll pose it to you, and
Sure.
we'll see
Yeah.
we'll see how you run with it. But there is a perception and view that woodland creation projects really don't consider the economy of timber going forward.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Yeah.
really feature on the reason why they've been planted.
Mm.
There's also the objection to conifers, which we know make up an awful lot of our timber
Sure.
economy. So, is there a...
Yeah. Yeah. I have some sympathy with that, John, and it's about, and I'm not sure. You know, I've got probably one of the biggest forestry projects in the north of England, and the objection from the local community who pretty much want to take it to judicial review, and kind of talking to some of those objectors said, would you have had the same problem if it was Woodland Trust? And they said no. So we have to kind of get across, one, the need for timber, and the fact, I made a note here, by 2050, we will have quadrupled our national demand for timber. So we need to do something about it. And in putting together these slides, I was talking to colleagues, and we had sort of changes politically about how we drive woodland creation forestry, where it has moved to, regardless of party politics, but where it's moved to, actually before the election and continuing after, is a need to promote productive forestry. Because of that fact, you know, quadrupling our demand for timber. So how do we actually bring the public on side? And that's partly why these exercises have been quite interesting. Personally and professionally, I think we do that by applying UK forestry standards. So that scheme I have in the northeast, we've had many discussions about how much of the scheme we can sacrifice to incorporate what is a plantation of productive forestry within a broadleaf framework. So we're not entirely hiding the plantation. It will be there for all to see, but we are adding to it with diversity, which is one of our woodland design principles. And we are trying to blend it into the landscape. So this is really cuts to what is the reason the commission employed me, is to make these kind of schemes fit into a landscape. and I think that is design has got a large part to play. And you see, I think a lot of people are going back to that first slide I showed you, thinking about forestry on the flow country, thinking that forestry is bad. And, you know, we have a job to do, a challenge, if you like, to actually turn that around. So, yeah, it's a good point. It's one which is at front and center of my mind pretty much all the time, John. Let me just show you a few other things that
Yeah, I think it's safe to say,
yeah.
John, it hasn't gone unnoticed, and yeah, it's,
yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, politically, there's a lot more support for that view than was previously. I'd say that that's north of the border, south of the border. You know, it was very much the case north of the border in Scotland. It is increasing the case in England as well. So it's really interesting putting things like this in front of people. There you go, John. A negative conifer wall on top of a hill. How might we mitigate that? You know, we might kind of feather that edge with a kind of broadleaf framework. You'd still have all that plantation behind you, but you wouldn't necessarily see it, and there wouldn't be much sacrifice to be done there. So yeah, press return. Interesting. So when I did all this research and we played around with various techniques, the actual focus groups, actually this isn't part UKFS, UK Hilltops Kept Free of Trees. That's not necessarily the case, although we do try and create a lot of open space. But some of the principles that we had in UKFS around unity or coalescence or some of the other spirit of place, you know, we use these words, or local distinctiveness or landscape context. People didn't use that terminology, but they certainly articulated those concepts, and I found this quite reassuring. That, you know, I thought, well, it's just not just me and Richard who hold these views, they are actually widely held. We also put a number, this was interesting, is actually South Pennines where I live, put a number of situations, and we increased woodland and we asked people what they thought. And there was a tipping point where people began to say, oh, that's no longer the South Pennines. So, you know, I can think of landscapes where we are these cumulative impacts of woodland. It's a little bit about how we plan it. We don't necessarily have that control because it depends on landowners, of course, you know, it's their land, but actually it might factor into how we actually look at an application in a landscape if it's going to bring about a landscape change. I have to say, landscape change isn't always bad. As we could see from those comments in the National Forest, communities that had seen woodland creation go from 9% to 27% were, on the whole, really positive about that landscape change. So what next? Yes, I couldn't help, knowing the audience, and I hope you'll forgive me, there was a life before I joined the Forestry Commission where I've done a lot of work on woodland heritage, and I managed a project called Celebrating Our Woodland Heritage. And I just thought, well, I was just trying to think with Simon, what will this audience want to hear about? Probably not too much about the grants and regulations, but I have got a few slides for you. Probably a bit about historic environment. Actually, this is about a couple of miles up behind me in Calderdale, Hardcastle Crags, and it's we looked at we found evidence of 86 charcoal burning platforms in that really small, it's about, overall it's about 100 acres. Yes, about 100 acres, I think. And this was a sort of community excavation project where we excavated some of those charcoal pits, and we took carbon dating, and we found the species And to our surprise, although this is the 19th century, we found a lot of hazel, which is no longer present in this landscape. And I suppose this is the point, I would say, when Natural England were trying to retain those national nature reserves in the Peak District, 100% ash. When they did the carbon dating and profiling, they found that as recently as 200 years ago, they were full of small-leafed lime and aspen, and birch and willow. So the National Nature Reserve was based on a concept that was not that, it was quite recent. So this kind of influenced a little bit the management plan in terms of species for this woodland, this sort of carbon dating. We found those charcoal pits weren't just 18th, 19th century, 17th century, they went back to the 15th century. So a really, really fascinating piece of work. I can't take the credit for this. I was a person doing a funding bid, but we employed an archaeologist and we looked at all sorts of structures, the history, heritage value of woods, the heritage values in woods. So that photograph in the middle, for example, on the top, is a network of trenches, for training trenches near Halifax. And Chris, our archaeologist, could not help himself but do a community archaeological dig of those. The sort of settlement, the cottage there housed, I think it was 14 people in the 1851 census. Just a sort of foundation now in the woods in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, hope you enjoy those. But yes, just final few slides here, which to kind of finish off, although I can dig out some slides on agroforestry for Tom. Woodland condition assessment. So I'm kind of hoping you might have heard of this, but if you haven't, then I'm glad to give you the opportunity. Whether woodlands are managed or not, I think we'd all agree that we don't know enough about our woodlands, and we as a Forestry Commission don't know enough, and actually do landowners or do Natural England. So this is really quite exciting kind of opportunity to put that power into the hands of woodland owners to give a overview in terms of woodland condition assessment. It's been developed by Forest Research and the Silver Foundation, and it's to compare results to, as it says here, classification thresholds, good, moderate, and poor. And why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? Well, there's a number of opportunities. For example, as I say, the direction of travel is that we try and work a lot more on a finer grain in terms of smaller woodlands, in terms of woodland management and incentivizing that. Taking Simon's point, it's about giving incentives to small woodland owners to do things. Then we kind of need a baseline of whether that's actually improving structural diversity, species diversity, ground flora. So this tool will help you identify where you are on that. There are also all sorts of things like biodiversity net gain, which thankfully I don't have the knowledge to impart to you, but biodiversity net gain could be a game changer, on some of these. It's bringing development, making sure that development actually funds biodiversity improvements. There's actually improving woodland condition could be one of those positives. So I'm not the person to ask about this, but there is a webinar on Tuesday, 8th of October at 2 p.m. Woodland condition assessment webinar. Sorry, I didn't credit them, but Silver Foundation, Field Studies Council. Yeah, they're the main people behind this as well. and go on their website for the app, guides and training. So I would really, suggest that's, really positive for you. Now, these are a couple of slides, 3 slides. I'm just going to flash them up there. I'm not entirely sure that is, whether you need to know this, or you can get it online. One of the great things about my job is I don't have to delve too much into grants and regulations. So this is really getting me out of my comfort zone if you ask me questions on this. But I said I'd put them up there on behalf of colleagues. The capital and benefits that you've got, and hopefully you might be aware of some of these. If my colleague who's a deer officer was here, we know what he'd say. And actually, when we look at those threats in terms of woodland creation, we actually, what are we looking at? We're looking at deer and grey squirrel. So, yeah, okay, I take your point there, John. Yeah, I see where that's true, and that's because it's been designed around biodiversity net gain. Simple as that. Yeah, it's not silvicultural assessment, no, or necessarily improvement. Yeah, I'd take that point on squarely on the chin. Yeah. What was I saying? Forgotten what I was going to say there. But yeah, no, I'm pretty much done there. But I could, if there's any other questions, let's do that. And I can bring up a few bits and pieces on agroforestry and bits which I missed out in terms of this slide pack, if people would like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
anyone else?
We're open for questions if there are any. Come off mute and yeah, ask away.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
We've got Tom. Tom, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, just again to thank Robin for the talk. The grey squirrel damage. I've been to a few different events where they've talked about trying to manage those sorts of things. Where you have roving deer, have you employed different techniques for protecting
So
young saplings?
So Tom, yeah, in terms of deer, so it's fair to say it's been neglected, by the Forestry Commission, but also by landowners. But we now have, as part of the expansion of Forestry Commission over the last couple of years, we have deer officers in every region, and their job in a way is to try and coordinate between landowners, and try and look at culling. We're also doing you might be aware of some of the seeking to increase supply. So funding for larders, also a sort of a kind of kite mark for venison, and a big push on marketing venison to get it to a much wider audience. So well, actually just to get it into supermarkets really. So that's part of that aspect. In terms of grey squirrel, various approaches, looking at genetic approaches, but I don't think that's possible. But I'm not sure.
I did go to a talk.
Yeah,
which was interesting. It seems some years away.
Yeah, who gave you talk, Tom? Who was it? Was it?
I could, yeah, just maybe I could find out and put on the chat.
Yeah. be interested in that. Yeah.
We usually
Yeah.
deal with the Squirrel Accord, and they did a talk
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
last year for
Okay.
yeah,
small
because
members.
Squirrel, yeah, it was Squirrel Accord at the
Yeah.
Wildlife Trust. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was a packed lecture.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We're
I know.
all impacted by grey squirrel. Yeah.
I don't know
yeah.
because I noticed, Tom, that you're in Shropshire, and I don't know if you've come across Norbury Park. I know Simon will. You come across Norbury Park and the owner
Yes,
there, and his patented squirrel trap that he's
I saw
got.
it. Yeah, there's a second
Yeah,
generation squirrel catcher.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Joe, who's the owner, is nothing if not a innovator in so many ways. So
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
I've
I've
seen that.
just yeah,
Sorry, Robert. I was just going to say we're probably wandering into aspects that
sure.
possibly
Yes,
we
yes.
need
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a woodland officer or a deer
Yeah,
officer
that's right.
to
It's
kind
not
of
my
answer.
bag, is it? It's
But
not my
we
bag.
we could certainly do that. You know, if there's an appetite
Sure.
to kind of go through. I've still got quite a few contacts at the Forestry Commission that
Of course.
owe me favours. So yeah, I'm sure we can get some of that
Have I
expertise
repaid
over.
yours yet, Simon? Am I free?
So
But it's been
yeah,
interesting seeing the wider landscape perspective that you are taking into account, and
Hmm,
that's quite pleasing to hear that's ongoing and
sure.
trying to
Yeah.
integrate it with some of the more modern challenges. And as John said, the core business still being woodland.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a balance to be struck, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And actually some in your neck of the woods next week and talking to a lot of sort of local authorities there, historic environment officers. We've had resistance to landscape change, and actually the point we want to convey is that we are trying to work within that landscape. We're trying to work within the grain of that landscape. We are talking about landscape change for sure. We're not hiding from that. But actually, if this agenda went away, your landscape's going to change anyway. The agricultural economics are changing. Loss of basic payments means that, farms are looking at different options. So you can ignore this agenda, or you can try and sort of work within this agenda to
Sort of manage the change. Yeah,
to manage
yeah,
the change. And I think,
yeah.
as a landscape architect, that's if we do anything, we try and manage that change in the landscape to
Great, yeah.
mitigate, to actually bring landscape restoration where we can, or mitigate the worst impacts of that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with commercial forestry, or indeed with broadleaf as well. So yeah.
Oh, very
I think
good. Very good.
one of the things I'd quite like to see, Robin, and I have spoken to a few of your colleagues about this, is how we can help with especially the topic that John brought up with regards to timber security going forward. And I would quite like the Smallwoods is quite a good, well-formed community. I quite like the idea of um, woodland creation schemes coming our way before they happen. For us to say this would actually lend, or this area would lend itself to a coppice grove, or an area of timber production, etc., etc. And I think the expertise that you've got in the room from Smallwoods members is that they've been there, done that, and they've actually, if they stood back and went, it'd be really good if this was over there, they would have that kind of understanding of one, how you could allow the site gradients to work in your favor, for instance. That's quite an important one. And also where you're likely to want to store timber going forward. So it might be that you've got an area of flat ground, but in actual fact that's going to be waterlogged or is waterlogged, and so you need to avoid that, and you actually want something which is partially sloped, so you've always got dry land for timber. And I think having those conversations and possibly having a walk over a potential site to help design woodland creation, I think that is possibly where small woods members
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
really add value. And I have actually offered that, but nothing's really come forward. But I guess that
Sure.
is just another, possibly viewed as a bit of a bureaucratic kind of
Yeah.
step,
Yeah.
but it's all part of that consultation. You're actually consulting with people that have got their hands
Yeah.
dirty and actually know intimately the pros and cons of woodland design,
Sure.
because they're dealing with the outcome of that.
So yeah, two answers to that, Simon. I think, well, first of all, from on high, there is, it's really good that you're part of the Small Woods Association are represented in the applicant development group, because it would be quite easy for that. Got to be careful what I say here, but it'd be quite easy for it to be dominated by the big players in forestry. So-called, but actually it's really good that you've got like a chair at that table. And as I say, increasingly there's recognition in terms of small woods playing a really important part in terms of getting woodlands into management. And the second point I make is that one of the advantages of the expansion that we've undergone in terms of Forestry Commission is that we've got a lot more new blood, younger people, younger than you and me, Simon, enthusiastic young people. And, a lot of them are bringing really new kind of thinking into the commission. And so we had the conversation about the Leeds Coppice Cooperative, and just at the area level. And I think some of this is more at the local connections, actually people like Mark Shipperley and Living Woods in Durham doing, all the stuff he does under Woodnet, and us, the actual woodland officers connecting in with those. So we've talked about, visiting Leeds Coppice workers. And before I took this job in the Forestry Commission, I couple of, friends, I would call them friends of mine over in Lancashire, who are coppice workers. I think you know them well. They were saying, Robin, when you get into the Forestry Commission, can you push coppice, because it doesn't seem to get the profile it should. And I think I've not entirely succeeded, possibly quite failed them in that endeavor. But they themselves have come up with some really interesting looking at evidence in terms of carbon sequestration and coppice, and it's an ancient woodland craft, but its time might have come in terms of some of these multiple benefits. We know the benefits for wildlife, we know the benefits in terms of getting woodland into management, but I'm not sure we've actually sold that idea of carbon sequestration and coppicing yet. So there is a lot more fresher thinking in the commission, I would say, but it's really good you're at that top table as well, Simon. So keep that off. Yeah.
No
Okay.
problem.
Right.
Well, I think
Yep.
I think that's us, Robin.
Great.
I think
Sure, yeah.
I'm really appreciative for your time tonight, and I think you've given us a really good flavour.
Sure.
I wonder whether going forward we possibly could look at doing a day out to look at ancient woodland character and things like that. I think that would be really interesting, and maybe some help with identifying historic landscapes and things like that. I think that would be really interesting.
Well, between you and me and probably several others on this call, we've got a really good, address book. I could drop Chris Atkinson, the archaeologist, in it for you to do a fascinating presentation. And we all know particular contacts we've got. And I have to say, Chris Tomlin, who's championing the woodland creation, the woodland condition assessment tool. And I take your points, John, about that. You can voice those yourself to Chris yourself. I think he'd be more than happy to do a presentation to the Small Woods Association about that, because that's something which, I think it's really useful for you to know about, for sure.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much,
Okay,
everyone.
thanks.
I will call it a close again. Brilliant. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
And,
well, pleasure.
Yeah.
And I hope you
Super.
enjoyed it. And thanks for your questions, Tom and John. Yeah, it's really, really good to present to you. So yeah, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Super.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Dave. Thank
Okay.
you.
Cheers.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye
Tom.
now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Yep. Bye now. Bye.